Hi, I'm Preston Williams, and welcome to another edition of Jazz Talk. Today on our show, we have with us a very special guest who needs no introduction. This gentleman has been on the scene for over 20 years and has worked with many greats from Michael Brecker to Christian McBride, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, and yes, Pat Metheny. He is a five-time Grammy Award-winning drummer, composer, and educator. Please welcome to Jazz Talk, Mr. Antonio Sanchez. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Preston. Thank you for
So
the
good to have you on, man. And as I mentioned before we got started, Antonio, you're one of my favorite drummers. I've been checking you out, man, for the last 2 decades. And I'm interested in knowing more about your humble beginnings, your background. I understand that you're from Mexico City, Mexico, and you started at a young age playing drums at like age 5. Tell us about your upbringing, man, and how you got involved in music.
Well, the culprit, I would have to say, it's my mother, Susana. She's
Okay.
not a musician, but she's, such an avid music fan and connoisseur, and she loves all kinds of music. But she's at heart rock and roller.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
she's flower child, and so when I was growing up, I was listening to all the bands she was listening to.
Mm.
And it was great music. Thankfully, I started with the Beatles and the Rolling
Wow.
Stones, the Who, Led Zeppelin, Janis
Oh, yeah.
Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. All those. That was a great time for rock and roll and for music
Mhm.
in general.
Mhm.
And she would be playing that in the house, and I would be just uh, getting that into my system very quickly by osmosis. And then my grandfather, we lived with my grandfather and my grandmother as well, and he would
Yeah.
play classical music when we were eating. So it was a lot of classical music, a lot of rock and roll, especially. So my love for it was very natural, and the way I actually got into drums was because my uncle was going out with this girl back then, and this girl's brother was a drummer.
Mm.
And one day we ended up at their house, and I saw this amazing Ludwig Vistalite kit, like the one John Bonham used to play, like sitting in the living room, and it looked like a spaceship,
Right.
and I was 5, and I remember just like looking at that thing, and just the sight of it was just already exciting, and of course I had seen my share of drums and pictures and stuff like that because I was really getting into the music. But when I saw it live, it just did something to me. And then this guy whose name was Fito, so a great drummer, he played, like 2 inches away from me. So I was just floored by the sound and the power of the drums and the looks and everything. And it's been my love ever since.
That's incredible, man. And as you're honing your skills, developing, by the time I guess you get into your teens, you're playing professionally.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I have a very obsessive personality, some people say. So I don't take up many things in my life, but the ones that I do, I just go, full in. So drums was one of those things that I didn't see it as, oh, I got to practice. It was just fun, and I loved playing, and I begged my mom to get me a drum set, but back then there were no kiddie drum sets that she could buy, for a little kid. So
Mhm.
she tried to bribe me with a snare drum first and a cymbal, see if that would be enough. But I needed the bass drum, man. So
Yeah.
I kept bugging her for the bass drum until when I was 9. She finally got me the full kit. It was like a Tama Swing Star, because I was so into the Police. Stuart Copeland played Tama, so
Yeah.
I wanted a Tama, and finally I got it, and I was just on that thing day and night, every day, but basically playing along to records. Those were my lessons with Fito. He would teach me basic technique and then how to play along to some of my favorite tunes that I learned because my mom was listening to them constantly.
So, Antonio, during that time, you probably weren't listening to jazz drummers then, were you? Like the Billy Cobham, Lenny Whites, and Tony Williams. That came later, right?
Yeah, way later. Yeah, I came into jazz through the back door. Absolutely, but I thought it was a good thing because the foundation of just the groove and
Hmm.
just playing for the music, I think was really good. And as a matter of fact, after I was into all those bands that I had mentioned before, then I discovered Rush, Neil Peart,
Yeah.
Police, which were, the repertoire and the playing was so much more complex than
Hmm.
I had been playing before. So I immediately was floored by Neil Peart's drum set to begin with. It was visually, it was just gorgeous.
Right.
And then obviously his style and the repertoire that Rush had, and then I started getting into prog rock,
Mm.
and that was a lot more challenging. But the funny thing was that when I was heavily in my prog rock stage, my mom tried to play me an Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers record.
Wow.
I said try because she failed miserably. She played it for me, and I thought it was horrible. I was like, "Mom, what the hell is this? Obviously, where's the backbeat?"
Right.
So obviously, I was not ready for it yet, and years later, when I finally was, my ears were ready for Art Blakey. I was like, "Oh my God, how did I miss this
Yeah. Yeah.
before?" But yeah, it was a process that from prog rock. Then one day I discovered the Chicory Electric Band, because actually, it's funny because I was uh, kind of convinced that I was so good already playing to my little albums, that I was like, well, I guess I should learn another instrument. So then I enrolled in the conservatory in Mexico to study
I was
classical
about to
piano.
ask you about that. Yeah. Yeah. Early
And
90s. And yeah.
and I loved classical music because we were listening to it every afternoon at home while we were eating. So it just also started sipping into my consciousness. And also I saw the movie Amadeus, which completely floored me, because there was this kid who was a prodigy, who was writing symphonies and operas by the time he was 10. So that kind of made a big impact on me, like a prodigy child. And I was
Hmm.
like, I want to learn that. I want to learn how to play the piano. I want to learn how to write classical music. And I got myself into the conservatory. And in the conservatory, even though it was a piano major, there was an ongoing jazz workshop that now it's a degree, but back then it was just a workshop. So I would, of course, be playing Beethoven and Mozart and practicing, but I would hear in the distance the big band playing. So I was like, that sounds kind of cool, and I started going over there. And even though I was really not into jazz,
Right.
obviously the sound and of a big band and the power of the drums was still there. So I started getting more into it and started becoming friends with some of the people that were in that workshop. And one of my friends
Oh, yeah.
recommended me, check this tape out, that I have. You might like this. And then it was the Chicory Electric Band. It was Light Years.
Yeah. Oh, that's a phenomenal recording, man. And like I said, that was around the same time I think I first heard Dave Weckl. But during that time at the conservatory, I think you met and hooked up with pianist Danilo Perez, and you guys
Oh, no, no, no,
become good
no.
friends.
Oh, that was way later, way
Oh,
later.
way later?
Oh yeah, this was still in Mexico. This was all in
Okay.
Mexico.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
this
Yeah.
was in the late 80s.
Late 80s. Okay. So after that, I know you went to Berkeley after that. Now, I think, is that where you met Danilo?
Basically, yes. I mean, the thing is, I was doing my degree as a classical piano major, and then when I discovered Chicory Electric Band, and I started that, made me go into a bunch of different directions.
Yeah.
So I discovered obviously Weckl, Vinny Colaiuta, Dennis Chambers, Billy Cobham, Joel Rosenblatt. I listened to Michel Camilo for the first time
Yes.
too, and Latin jazz. I had been listening to Latin music in the periphery my whole life, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, this is amazing, and I
Hmm.
also want to learn how to play this. And I had a band where we would play fusion, and then I had another band where we would play verbatim every Michel Camilo tune on the Caribe record.
Right.
And so that made me practice a lot more. I started working a lot on my technique, And then having conversations with my mom about what my future was going to be. um, we thought, it was probably better if I go somewhere in the States and try to learn jazz, because that was the music that was starting to call me a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I applied. I applied to both Musicians Institute in LA and to Berkeley. I got accepted to both, but Musicians Institute was just a year, so I wanted something longer that I could really sink my teeth into, and I ended up going there in '93.
And that's awesome. That's awesome. During that time period, now, were there other, I guess, well-known musicians who were there with you, Antonio, that were studying around the same time?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the faculty was in the drum department. There were some people that I really admired. Kenwood Denard was there. Amy
Yeah.
Dad, Casey Sherrill, Ron Savage, John Ramsey. They were all, amazing teachers. And some of my classmates, Miguel Zenon, John Blackwell, uh,
Mm-hmm.
Ruben Rogers. They were really, really good drummers. Marko Djordjevic. There were a lot of really good drummers and really good instrumentalists, and it was just a great period for me because I had a lot of technique, but I had no concept
I
whatsoever.
got you.
You know,
Interesting.
I was playing along to the records, but nobody taught me how to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
when I was not playing with the record, then I would just kind of go crazy. And I had all this technique that I didn't really know how to apply and how to play musically. I didn't know much about leaving space, about dynamics, those kinds of things. And when I got to Berkeley, it was a good time for me because I had all the chops in order to get to where I wanted to go quickly. So when I started getting a lot of instructions from my teachers, I was
Mm-hmm.
able to grasp it quickly. But in the beginning, it was a disaster for me. Nobody wanted to play with me because I was just like, you know, playing so many notes and not leaving space, and I had not really an idea of how jazz was played and how to interact and the concept of form, all these things. I had no idea. So it was a steep learning curve, but thanks to the fact that I was so eager to learn it, I started doing well quickly.
Yeah. And I would say, in regard to jazz, a lot of it, probably most of it, is simply listening.
Exactly. And I didn't know how to listen.
Yeah.
Playing with a record, it has nothing to do with playing with people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I luckily I had really good teachers that put me in the right path, and I started also listening to a lot of records of this music.
Mm.
I remember when I heard My Funny Valentine 4 and More, obviously the classic album from the second great Miles Davis quintet with
Mhm.
Tony Williams, who was 17 at the time.
Right.
I heard that, and it had the same effect on me as when I heard John Bonham the first time, or
Oh,
when
yeah.
I heard Neil Peart the first time. I was like, what is this? Except that this time was different because it was really the band that was like a living entity that was breathing and morphing as they were playing. So I started realizing, man, whatever one person does affects everybody else, and everybody else changes direction in a heartbeat. How do they do this? And I
Mhm.
started listening a lot. I started playing a lot, and then eventually I started getting the gist of it little by little.
Yeah, you just brought up something about that band. I had saxophonist Gary Bartz on the show last week, and he just talked about that band. And he said Miles Davis was probably the greatest band leader that he ever worked with. And he said, due to the fact that he listened really well. All the musicians, listened to each other really well. And Herbie Hancock had actually told a story, Antonio. He says one time he was playing and he played a bad note. And he just remembered, he said, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. This is horrible. He says Miles stopped and paused and played something to fit his wrong note. And afterwards told Herbie, why didn't you play that, or play like that the other night? And he just says, wow, just opened his mind up. But yeah, listening is so important. And I mentioned Danilo Perez, the great pianist, of course, who's with the Wayne Shorter Quartet. Now, didn't he recommend you to, I think, Dizzy Gillespie's big band or something? You went on to play with that group?
Right. I became friends with Danilo because we were both hanging in Boston at the time. He was teaching at New England Conservatory, even
Mm-hmm.
though I was at Berkeley. But then, we became friends anyway. He would come and hang at this club that I used to play with, used to play in a lot, called the Wonder Bar
Wonderful. Okay.
in Brookline. And he used to live close by. So then he would come and hang whenever we would be playing. And we became friends. And then one day he asked me if I wanted to go to Panama and teach this thing called the Jamboree with him that he used to do every year. I'm not sure if he still does it, but it was just a bunch of students that he liked. And we formed a little band and we went over there and then we taught and then we played a couple of gigs. And we had an amazing time. And then on the way back, he told me, I recommended you for something, not sure it's going to happen, but you know, who knows? So then a couple of days later, I got a call from Paquito de Rivera's office offering me this tour in Europe for the summer. That was '97 with the Dizzy Gillespie United Nation Orchestra, which Dizzy had already died. He died in
93.
94.
94, yeah.
And but Paquito kind of took the band and kept doing things with it. So then he invited me to play, and it was my first major tour. So I was beyond excited. And Paquito, somebody that I admired, and a lot of the people in the band were people that I admired too. So it was amazing. And then when I came back, actually my student visa had run out. Mexicans, we have all kinds of problems with our visas when it comes to studying or staying here or working. It's always a nightmare. So my visa expired and I couldn't stay any longer. So I had to go back to school.
Oh, wow.
But luckily, New England Conservatory gave me a full ride. And Danilo was teaching at New England Conservatory. So as a master's student, they asked me, you can have two private teachers and they could be drummers or non-drummers. So I thought, I've been studying with drummers my whole life. So why not study with non-drummers that they can give me a completely different perspective on what they want from me as a drummer.
Yeah.
So I studied with Danilo, private lessons, and with George Garzon. So between those two, it was just a great thing to do, because we would just play, like if it was Elvin and Train for an hour, and if there's somebody that can take it out, it's George. So we would play all the things you are, and he would take it out, and I'll be like, "Are we playing all the things you are?" I have no idea, but I was trying to keep the form in my head, and then all of a sudden, boom, he would hit it, and I was like, "Oh my God, yeah, we're still playing it."
Yeah.
So that was a really cool thing for me to do in order to keep my place inside the form. That was a really good learning experience. And then with Danilo, my private lessons, we would work on different things, but I had an evil plan all along, which was to play in his band. So what I started doing is like, Danilo, how does this tune of your album Panamunk go?
Right.
And he would start playing it, and then I would start playing it because I knew it perfectly. And he'd be like, "Oh, you know this?" I'm like, "Yeah, a little bit, And then he would get excited, and we start playing it. And then I started bringing bass players that would also learn the tune, and unknowingly he would be training me to play in his band, basically.
Right.
And that lasted for a year. And then when Jeff Ballard was playing with them back then, couldn't do a couple of gigs in Paris, he called me, and then I did it. And then after that, he was looking to make a change in his trio. So then I started playing with him, and John Benitez started playing, and we toured for a long time. Then Carlitos Enriquez, who now plays with Win, came in the band, and we played a bunch more. And it's a great learning experience to play trio.
Yeah.
We were playing all over the place constantly. Every month we had something. Back then you could keep working with one band for forever.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember we would be in the States for a month, just in 4 places: 1 week in LA, 1 week in Seattle, 1 week in Chicago, and 1 week in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
So you could really hone in on the music, playing 2 sets every night, 6 nights a week. Man, you can't do that anymore. That just doesn't exist. It's sad, but I'm very happy that I got the tail end of that.
Yeah, that's incredible, man. Now, during, I guess, maybe it was early 2000s or whatever, while touring with Danilo, that's when Pat heard you. And I guess he was just so impressed. And I think during that time he was holding auditions for drummers, but something about your playing that just blew him out away. You know, I actually had his former drummer, Paul Wertico, was on the show about a month and a half or so ago, and we had talked about you a little bit afterwards. And yeah, very impressed. But let me ask you a question. Did you, after a particular tour with Danilo, did like Pat get in touch with you, say, "Hey, man, I want to talk to you," or something about your playing that just got me? How did that whole thing unfold?
It's a really funny story actually, because we were on tour in Europe with Danilo, and we were going to play at the Torino Jazz Festival in Italy, and we got word that Pat was also going to be on the bill, and actually Pat wanted to play first, and he wanted us to play second. Usually the main act plays second, but he doesn't like playing second, so he likes to come in, destroy everything, and split. So that was basically what was going to happen. He was playing with his trio with Larry Grenadier and Bill Stewart, amazing trio. And but our trio with Danilo was killing too. I mean, we had been playing a lot, and back then I was using this kind of hybrid kit that had a timbale, I had a couple of bongos, I had a conga. So it was the jazz kit plus a bunch of percussion. I had a cowbell in my left foot and a bunch of other percussion thingies. So it's an interesting hybrid thing that I was doing, and it really lent itself well to the music that we were playing in the moment. So uh, Pat played, and Pat is like a superstar in Italy. And so we were like, oh my God, now we have to follow this. And then we started playing, but people got into it. And Pat was having dinner backstage. It was an open air thing, so he could listen to everything we were playing. And there's a really funny Italian promoter who put the thing together. His name is Antonello Vitale, the quintessential Italian promoter guy.
Right.
And he was having dinner with Pat backstage, and he asked Pat, "So what do you think about this trio? Do you like it?" And Pat was like, "Yeah, I like it. Especially like the way the drums and the percussion play together, because usually I don't like that." And then Antonello said, "Yeah, but it's just one guy. You didn't see." And then Pat stood up and went to the side of the stage and just started checking me out. And that's the first time that he saw me playing. So he made a mental note. And then the same tour, a couple of weeks later, we were playing in London at the Pizza Express, and Pat was playing at the Barbican. And after his gig, he came over and he saw our second set without
Mm,
knowing. And then after the show, so in Italy, we did meet and we talked for a second, but that was it. But this time around, we talked a lot more, and he asked me a few questions, and then he asked me for my email. And then when I got back home, I had an email waiting with beautiful, really nicely constructed. Pat is a very articulate guy, with everything he had liked about what he heard, and then some questions like, so do you like touring constantly? It was like a little bit of a questionnaire. And then
yeah.
at the end, it said, by the way, are you free on Thursday? Do you want to play in my studio in Manhattan? And I was like, oh my God, of course. So I wrote him back, and then we met at his studio, and he opened the door, and it was just him with a bunch of gear, and one of Jack DeJohnette's old drum sets was sitting there.
Mm,
Totally, it felt like I was playing in a strange a spaceship. It was like
right.
so not with really old black heads that and his cymbals too. So it was kind of disconcerting at first, but then I think the first thing we played was Turnaround by Ornette Coleman, and he started the dan the dan the dan the dan the dan. I started playing, and
Right.
then all of a sudden, 4.5 hours went by.
Wow.
It was incredible. Just and I remember very well, like, I felt super comfortable because our time, internal time clock is very similar, and
Mm.
it just felt really effortless. But in the middle of the thing, all of a sudden I looked at him. I was like, oh my God, this is Pat Metheny I'm playing with, and I kind of freaked out for a
It
second.
hits you then, huh?
It hit me, but then I was like, no, no, keep your composure. You're
Right,
doing
right, right.
well. And we had a great time, and he recorded the whole thing, and then we kept getting together every now and then. And he kept me in suspense for like half a year because he was doing a bunch of other stuff.
He's
And
always on the road.
yeah, and he told me, I've been thinking about making a change in the Pat Metheny group. I think you would be a good candidate because you come more from the straight eighth world more than the swing world,
Mm.
and you have the rock background, you have the jazz background,
You have
and
everything,
you
man.
hear in the Pat Metheny group is jazz without playing jazz. So the communication, the sensibility, the technique, everything comes under the umbrella of jazz, but we don't play the obvious thing that you would play when you play jazz. We kind of mix it up.
Right.
So then we got together a couple of times with Lyle Mays, rest in peace,
Yes.
and Steve Rodby. And another thing he was worried about is me playing along to sequences and tracks because they did that a lot. But luckily, I had been doing that for years in different situations, so that was not a problem. And then one day he told me, "Man, if you want the gig, it's yours." And that was in 2001, like spring of 2001. And then that same summer, we got into the studio to record "Speaking of Now."
Speaking of now, yeah, that was the first time I saw you, 2002, and you just made me think about something when you mentioned Jack DeJohnette. I remember that. I still have that recording with Pat and them, 8081, which is fantastic. But yeah, Antonio, I saw you, and I'm like, man, who is this drummer? And I just remember I love your facial expressions when you were playing, man. Because I was sitting up front, and I said, you were like, you're so into it. I said, check this cat out. But I loved your playing and just the energy that you gave that band. It's like the band rose to a new level. But that was a great tour, man. And then I saw you guys a couple years after that,
The Way Up.
the way up. Oh, it's like futuristic music. It's like I can listen to that in 20 years and
I,
it's still like so far. I mean, it's
the
like
Way
Pat
Up.
just has this one long song, and I'm like, man, I love what you guys were doing. And I caught you guys both times when you came to DC Lisner Auditorium.
Right.
Pat, I guess, likes the acoustics there, but yeah, that was a great tour, man. And
But I have to say, in the beginning, the adjustment of me with the group and them with me, it was not easy because they had been playing this, the new repertoire wasn't so much of a problem, but the classics, you know,
right,
it all sounded different to them because I have such a completely different touch than
right.
Paul
Paul
Wernick
Vertigo,
or
yeah,
Dan Gottlieb.
right.
So I remember Pat looking at me like, "What are you doing?" And even though I wasn't doing anything weird, I just have a different touch, and a different sound. So it was a period of adjustment. And when I listen to Speaking of Now, I sound more like I wanted to sound like they wanted me to sound than what I sound
Mm,
like. I was really aiming to please, and I sound very different in that record than when what I would have played like now, for example. Of course, that was a long time ago, but I didn't feel like I was fully absorbed and integrated into the group. So even though I love that record, I love the music, my playing it always sounds a little strange to me still. Then speaking of sorry,
way
the
up.
Way Up, that I was a lot more comfortable, and they were more comfortable with me, and they let me loose.
That music just went to a new level because when I think of Paul Vertigo and some of the early stuff, his cymbal work, he's got a certain technique or style when he plays the cymbals. But yeah, the way up was just a whole nother level. I loved it. I was curious, how did you get hooked up with Chick Corea, Antonio? You worked with him too on one of your recordings. How'd you hook up with Chick?
Well, obviously working with Pat, that was a very high profile gig, especially when I joined the Pat Metheny group was still, pretty
Yeah,
popular, very visible. So we would tour a lot, man. I mean, those tours were crazy. So obviously, word got out that there's this new drummer and the band is sounding really different, blah 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 blah, and people obviously checked it out. So and everybody knows Pat, and then you know peripherally Chick got to hear me. Michael Brecker got to hear me.
But yeah,
Gary
Michael Brecker.
Burton got to hear me. Charlie Hayden got to hear
Hmm.
me. Toot Steelman's got to hear me. So all these people, all of a sudden I was in the radar. I remember, it was 2003. We did a little trio, a quartet tour, sorry, with Christian McBride and Brecker, Pat, and myself, and it was a double bill with the Chicory Electric Band. I remember I was on the side of the stage, just listening to them sound check, and I was
Yeah.
just, oh my god, this is so cool, the Chicory Electric Band. Because I never saw the original one. I saw the
Mm.
Chicory Electric Band 2. By the time I got to Boston, the Chicory Electric Band was not really working that much. So to see all of the original guys together was really cool for me. And I remember Chick looked at me, and I was like, "Oh my god!" And then he said, "Hey, Antonio, how you doing?" And I was like, "He knows my name." I mean, I was floored. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Then I think it was that time, I went up to him and I told him, "Chick, I don't want to die before I get to play with you. Anything, anytime, please just call me. I'll be there in a second." Okay, okay. And then, like, a few months later, I got a call. I was like, "Oh, this little gig in Miami. Do you want to do it?" I was like, yes. And then, we did a couple of tours with Eddie Gomez in South America. We went to Japan
Mhm.
times with Patitucci, and it's always been an amazing relationship. And he's just such an example for all of us.
Oh
He's
yeah.
still doing what he's doing at the level that he does it.
Yeah, yeah. I really loved his first band even more, Return to Forever. I mean, that was one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah.
The stuff that they were doing was great. But you also, as we just mentioned, you worked with the late Michael Brecker, man. What was that like?
Oh man, Mike, I often think about how we need right now more than ever good people,
Mm,
not just good musicians, but good people that have a very strong um, energy and moral compass, and just being around them just made you feel good. It's just like one of those wholesome, salt of the earth guys that just didn't bullshit, didn't do anything that he didn't need to do. He just played like a god,
mm.
and kept his mouth shut whenever he knew it was better to not say anything. And he was just an amazing person. And one of the things that to me was one of the most thrilling things I got to do with him was playing a lot of duos, because he liked playing duo with me so much. Once in Japan, uh, we started wanting he started playing it, and then I joined in, and it was a long intro. And I remember him laughing, I laughing, and the audience laughing, because sometimes we would like play exactly the same thing at the same time. It was just a joy. And the drum saxophone thing is just such a,
Yeah,
I don't know if it's because of Train and Elvin, but also Sonny Rollins, and he would also exploit that sound a lot. And it's happened in different times with different people, but the saxophone and drum communion is just something very special. And to do it with Brecker was like, it was mind-boggling for me.
yeah, yeah. I can imagine. Now, Antonio, you're also an educator too. Now, I believe you joined the faculty. Was it is it New York University in
I did New York
2006?
University for a while, but
Yeah.
the thing is, I was touring so much at the time that I was never able to really fulfill all my commitments. And
Hmm.
I think it's time for me to stop right now. And I was on the road constantly, so I do a lot of workshops. I do a lot of residencies. I do a lot of master classes and clinics, but
Yeah.
I'm not committed to an institution right now.
Right. Is that something that you enjoy doing, teaching?
Yes, I don't know if I would enjoy teaching like on a daily basis, but I love talking to people about music and sharing the little, or that I can share with them. in different contexts. I love doing that, and I feel it's also, you know, badly needed, because a lot of the drum clinics I saw when I was coming up, they were so confusing, because
Mm,
the message was always how to play faster, how to play faster with your feet, how to have better technique with your hands, how to do quintuplets over seven, and then how to, it was like, okay, if you're very advanced, maybe you can get something out of it, but they rarely talked about making music. So in the beginning, when I was doing clinics, it was mostly about technique, and then I started morphing my message little by little. And then when I started realizing how important it is for drummers to understand storytelling, you know,
mm,
when they play, leaving space, using dynamics, developing a motif, question and answer, tension and release, all these things that uh, exist in music, but if nobody teaches you or tells you how they work, that's why when I was saying that I had no concept, when I had a lot of technique, that happens to a lot of drummers. So my first question every clinic that I do is like, okay, so how many drummers do we have here? And 90% of the people raise their hand. And then my second question is like, and how many real musicians do we have here? And it's always hilarious because they don't know if they should raise their hand or not.
mm.
And I said, well, that's why I'm here. Is the oldest joke for musicians, for drummers.
Yeah.
Musicians, drummers are not musicians. But after this 2 hours, I want you to think of yourselves as musicians who just happen to play drums. That's it. So my whole message is about storytelling, how to build phrases, how to build sentences into a story that will keep the audience engaged, that will keep you engaged, and that you won't be one of those drummers that just does never shut up and never says anything interesting. You can talk your whole life. You can say many things and never say anything meaningful. So that's what I don't want them to do, and my whole ethos now is about that.
Yeah, yeah. Antonio, I'm thinking about just drummers in general and drummers who are composers. I think the first person that comes to my mind is Tony Williams, Max Roach, but you fall in that line too. And I wanted to talk to you about the 2014 film that you scored, Birdman. Man, that was fantastic.
Thank
How did that whole thing come about? How did you get to work on a project like that?
you. Well, it's another interesting story, because when I was coming up in Mexico, I was listening to the radio all the time, and it was this particular station that I really liked, 96.9 WFM, who
Hmm.
played the hippest music in Mexico around that time. And they had a nightly show called Magic Nights, and the DJ of these shows was Alejandro González Iñárritu, the director of Birdman, who was a DJ before he started his film career. And this when I was a teenager. And then one day, listening to the nightly show, I heard this tune, who happened to be Pat Metheny, playing Last Train Home.
Mm.
So I heard Pat for the first time through Iñárritu, and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." And then his voice came up. It was like, "Okay, this was Last Train Home by the Pat Metheny Group. Cool, Pat Metheny Group." I started checking out Pat Metheny Group. This was when I was still in Mexico. Then I moved to the States. Fast forward many years, I ended up playing with the Pat Metheny Group, and we're playing on the Speaking of Now tour in 2005 in LA. And Alejandro González Iñárritu came to the show because he was a fan. I met him after the show. You know, we hit it off right away. He's a really cool guy. We stayed in touch. And then when the time came for him to do Birdman, he thought of me, because he that night, I think, really kind of stayed in his consciousness, because it was a really good gig. And I did this really long drum solo, and he said, "Man, you were like an octopus that night." And he called me. I was like, "Man, I'm thinking of this new movie that I'm doing, and I thought a drum based score would be really interesting. Do you want to do it?" I'm like, hell yeah. So that's how it started. And of course I was elated and I was petrified at the same time, because I was like, how the hell am I going to do this? But with his guidance and his trust, man, it was a piece of cake. We did the whole score like in a day and a half, and most of it was just improvised. The first thing we did was go, because there was nothing for us to look at yet. We met in New York and we worked off of the script, and he would have me play based on the scenes that he would explain to me. And then he took those demos and superimposed them on the rough cut of the film once they already had shot
Mhm.
film. And then I came back to LA. They showed me what they did, and then we redid everything, keeping some of the things that he had liked, changing some of the things that didn't work. Uh,
Mhm.
but this time looking at the movie so that we could really hone in on movement and dialogue and that kind of stuff. But it was such an
Yeah.
incredible experience to work with him like that.
It was incredible, man. You did a phenomenal job. I was just talking to someone about that the other day. The film. Also, the following year, you had I guess, a little part at the end where you played on the Don Cheadle Miles Ahead film. You were with Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter, man. What was that like working with those guys?
I mean, it was so surreal because when we were actually shooting that scene, Don was in full Miles Davis getup.
Right.
So I was, behind my drums, and I could see Herbie right here, Wayne right here, and then the back of Miles with the trumpets. I was like, oh my God, this is too bizarre. But it
Yeah.
was, we just played one tune the whole day,
Hmm.
and we probably got it after two or three takes. But Don was like, man, can we do another one? And they were like, yes, let's do another one. And we just kept on playing because it was just so much fun, and every time it would be different. And Esperanza was playing bass, and every time Herbie started soloing, it was just, I mean, that's when I've always known about the genius of Herbie. But that day, it was a very simple structure that we were playing. It was very groovy, kind of funky, but every single solo he took, it was like a different world, you know.
Mm.
And I was like, man, this is what a real improviser does. He just makes it work in a completely different way every time, makes everybody play in a different way. And I have another really funny Herbie story, man. So we did the International Jazz Day for UNESCO in
Mhm.
Havana, Cuba,
Right.
like 3 years ago, and they invited me to play drums. And I was gonna play with Herbie. One of the tunes I was gonna play was with Herbie, Marcus Miller, Kenny Garrett, and
Mm.
Ambrose Akimuzir.
Yeah.
So I was like,
Trumpeter.
okay,
Yeah.
this is gonna be amazing. We played this tune called 4:30, and so we rehearsed it. Everything was cool. But the day when you looked at the schedule, because it was like a million different bands, a bunch of different musicians, coming in and out of the stage. There were ushers that would come and get you, like, okay, are you ready? Now you have to be waiting here, blah blah blah. So I looked at the schedule, and I had to play like 3 or 4 different times with 4 different bands at different times. And then there were speeches and televised. It was very very produced and very confusing too. I had, everybody had to be like, okay, is it my time now? When are we playing? And so ushers would come and get you.
Mhm.
So I looked at the thing, and I was playing with another band, and then I was sure that I had to leave the stage. So I left the stage and I went to get my music, and all of a sudden I started hearing screams, Antonia, Antonia. And I was like, what's going on? And I was like on the other side of the theater,
Right.
in my dressing room. And then I come down running, and like, they started without you. And I'm like, what? So I started just running through a bunch of people. I had to go through a courtyard, go in the stage door. It was packed on the side of the stage. So I ran and I stopped like at the edge of the stage, and the drums were on the other side of the stage.
Oh
And I was
wow.
like, so should I run behind the stage? Should I go for it now? I had no idea what to do. I was so stressed out. So I ran, I dashed to the drums. I get to the drums. I put my chart on the music stand. I tried to open my stick bag and it's stuck. I'm like fishing two sticks through a little hole. Finally get them out. I'm gonna start playing and my chart is backwards. I mean, it's just like a nightmare, like an anxiety dream.
Right, right.
And all of us, and Marcus and Kenny Garrett are looking at me like, dude, what are you doing? And Herbie's playing already, and and I'm trying to find my place in where they are in the piece. And then I'm like, okay, I think we're gonna go to the bridge. So then all of a sudden, boom, I come on the bridge, and okay, we start playing. But I was miserable. I was like, this has never happened to me in my whole life, and I
Right.
miss it with Herbie and these guys. Come on, I mean, it's just like too ridiculous to be true. So I was just sweating, and I think in the video you can see me really upset. But we finished it, and I get off the stage and I'm like, oh my god, this is the end of my career. I have ruined everything, and I'm just completely sulking. I call my wife. I'm like, I'm just, and that was basically the end of the gig. That was the last tune.
Wow.
So um, so I said, okay, I have to go out and face the music at some point. So I came out of my dressing room and I started looking for the people that I needed to apologize to. So I went up to Marcus first and I said, man, I'm sorry. And Marcus was like, oh man, that happened to me also last time because it's so confusing. I'm like, oh, okay, thanks for making me feel better. Kenny, I went up to him and was like, oh, dude, don't worry about it. So but the one that was worrying me the most was Herbie. So finally I see him, and I went up to him like, Herbie, man, I meant absolutely no disrespect. I have nothing but respect for you. This has nothing that has ever happened to me. I'm mortified. I'm so sorry. And he was like, man, it was so cool because it was really loose in the beginning when you were not there. And I wasn't sure what was going on, but then you came in and man, it was amazing. So I was like, man, that's why Herbie's Herbie. Because he doesn't. It doesn't matter if I would have come in with a kazoo, he would have made it work.
Mhm.
And that was a great learning experience for me. Like one of the greatest ever that could have told me, man, you're the most unprofessional person on the planet. He just decided to roll with it, and he made the best out of it in the moment. And that's jazz: being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
That almost sounds like a Miles Davis story because I've talked to some of the band members, like Dave Holland, and some of the things they were saying about Miles Davis, and maybe that's a lesson that Herbie learned from Miles. You never know. But I also wanted to ask you, in your spare time, Antonio, if you're just home relaxing, or maybe you're just chilling out with your wife, you guys are having a meal. What type of music do you listen to, or what artists are you checking out? When you're just at home, a little bit of old jazz, new jazz, some Led Zeppelin or classic stuff. What are you checking out?
I always go back to my roots, man. I listen to rock all the time,
Yeah.
rock and roll a bunch. I've been listening to soul a lot. I'm obsessed with Fresh from Sly and the Family Stone lately. A lot of yeah. I mean, I'll open my phone real quick and tell you what I've been listening to
Okay.
lately. There's a really cool band called Mute Math that
Ah,
I
okay.
discovered because I was doing this Zoom thing with Kristen McBride and Omar Hakim, and Omar played it. I was
It's
like,
funny
oh,
you mentioned
yeah.
Omar. I got him coming up on the show soon too. Yeah.
Yeah, so I discovered that because of them, because of him. I have this really cool samba raiz, which is like the old school samba
Yeah.
playlist that I've been listening to a lot. Omu Sangare, this African singer, she's incredible. I was listening to Lettuce the other day. It was this super funky band with my friend Adam Deitch on drums.
Hmm.
Um, I was listening to a bunch of Cuban old school bolero the other day. A lot of Beck. I love Beck. I've been listening to
Oh
Beck
yeah. Oh
a
yeah.
bunch lately. Um, uh, I was listening to the Kid Jarrett tune album the other day, the Melody at Night with You, which I hadn't heard, and that's gorgeous.
Keith
That's
is a genius. Yeah.
um, I like listening to this band called Hiatus Coyote from Australia. They're
Okay.
great. Another band from Australia called 7030. or 3070. I always get them mixed up, but they're really, 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 really good. So jazz, I don't listen to that much. I every now and then I feel like I need to listen to. The thing is, that I played it so much
Yeah.
that obviously, my I feel like my ear always needs a little bit of a break from that,
Mm.
and to get inspiration from something else so that I can inject it into whatever it is that I'm doing. But uh, one jazz thing that I listen to a lot is Coltrane plays the blues. I That's one that I go to a lot, just because it's so swingy and so great. But I a lot of classical music too.
Mm.
I've been listening to a lot of Debussy. I love Debussy always. Bach.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I'm a very eclectic.
Yeah, I was about to say, Antonio, your ears are open, man. You're listening to everything, and that's great. And the great musicians always do that. You have to keep your ears open. Miles
Oh,
Davis once said that. About jazz. They said, Miles, how'd you get into jazz? And Miles stopped him. He says, the music I play isn't jazz. To him, that was like a dirty word.
yeah, yeah,
He says he called it social music or just music in general.
yeah.
So that's
And
great.
to say jazz nowadays is just so narrow. Because I mean, the music that I write, I guess it's jazz, but it's just mixed with so much stuff that, I don't have a shot in the jazz category with what I do, in the Grammys. And that's a problem that actually I was part of a couple of committees last year, and I kept bringing that up. I was like, the, the Grammys got rid of the contemporary jazz category
Hmm.
few years ago, and now it's badly needed. When they got rid of it, there was a shift to acoustic jazz that was very heavy and very noticeable. And now the shift is back to a lot of electronic based jazz. Improvised music with tons of electronics. So if you are competing in the same category as completely acoustic jazz, it's just kind of apples and oranges. So I think that needs to be brought back urgently.
Tony, I heard Pat say this in an interview a number of years. Pat Metheny, they were just asking him about music, and he says, I do like the old classic stuff, that I check out from time to time. He says, but I like to play a type of music or a type of jazz that's never been heard before. It just got to keep the music moving. And I think you've been doing that, man. And listen, I want to thank you so much for being on Jazz Talk. You're a class act, one of my favorite musicians, and I appreciate you joining us today. Please hang on. I'm about to close out the show. Well, you've heard it from the great Antonio Sanchez. And as the saying goes, if the music grooves and makes you move, it must be jazz. I'm Preston Williams with Jazz Talk signing off. Peace.